This season of the year, home for the wild geese was a lonely marshland lying somewhere near the Mexican border, far removed from the haunts of humankind. It was a day in spring, but not just an ordinary day. This was the moment some mysterious message had gone through the ranks. This was a day on which exciting things would happen, a day of portent. For one thing, it was the mating season, and the time when the geese would choose each other and pair off. This was the time when mated pairs flew together, the time when they swam together and stayed together, never out of each other's sight. For it is the unchanging way of the Canada geese that once they're mated, they are faithful for life. Later that morning, a new touch of drama came to the marsh, the arrival of the snow geese. Cousins of the Canadas, these handsome birds frequent the same watering places and in their season travel the same flyways. And that was their purpose now, to make ready for the annual migration north. And so they came, not in dozens, not in hundreds, but in thousands. By actual count, in this one flight, 17,000 birds. That, it seems, was what the day's portent had been about. The annual spring migration would soon begin. A brief moment to rest, then on again. A journey that would carry the geese north to Oregon and Washington, and for some, the prairies of Canada. 1,000 non-stop miles along the broad Pacific Flyway. Our gander and his mate would make this migration too, along with the others. But since it was to be their first, they would go as followers, not leaders. And for the moment, their identity would be lost in the thrilling spectacle of mass flight. The mystery of migration is one of nature's great unanswered riddles. How do the wild geese navigate? What instinctive compass guides them on their unerring way? No man can say, for no man knows. Much depended, of course, on a wise leader, a veteran who knew the landmarks from journeys made in other years, the certain rock formations that had special meaning. For sometimes it was a certain river that was known to be winding its way north. Sometimes the landmarks were man-made, a highway system laid on the land like a ruler pointing north. Or perhaps it was simply a northering railroad and a northering train. The wild goose's sense of direction is truly uncanny. But this was no easy journey. It was a battle all the way, a test of stamina, a fight against fatigue, and for many a weary mile, a battle against the elements themselves. To these wild travelers, a house on a hill was not the famous Hearst Castle at San Simeon. It was simply a house on a hill, and another signpost telling them their navigation was correct. By now, they had left the dry desert far behind. Now they were racing spring itself and the season's wildflowers that had begun to carpet these lush California meadows and hills. The flyway was as wide as the whole state, sometimes following the central valleys, sometimes the colorful coastline. For these airborne travelers, San Francisco Bay became a natural checkpoint. Here they took their bearings carefully, for now their course would take them inland. In the great Sacramento River basin, they followed the river's course, passing the checkered patterns of man's orchards and fields. Soon they began to catch up with spring as they crossed the northern ranges, where snow still lay on the higher peaks. Finally, journey's end, and the long, graceful let down to a sheltered refuge and a well-earned rest. This would be their new home for the summer. Here on the peaceful reaches of Malheur Lake, the migrating geese at last had found sanctuary. This was the season in nature when all wild things seek out their own. But among these many matings, none would be more permanent, more loyal and devoted than that of the Canada geese. This remote and lonely spot would be their breeding ground, for to all intents and purposes, it was uninhabited. Almost, but not quite. It seemed this was the private preserve of another wild soul, a lad of 9 named Dan Tolliver. He was something of a loner, a boy of the sagebrush who was more at home on the prairie than on his family's farm. Young Dan Tolliver was the true conservationist. He had learned to respect all life in nature's wide domain, and he was friend to all. And so it was only natural that this young vagabond should eventually discover the nesting ground of the wild geese. And from that moment on, there would hardly be a day go by that he wasn't at his post, watching, but always as observer, not as participant. And so it came about that Dan was witness to many an intriguing episode. And before this summer was over, he would know this little family better than his own. About a month later, the nest became the stage on which an age-old drama was played out. The drama of life beginning. As for most wild things, life for the goslings began with struggle. As soon as the youngsters dried off, which took only minutes, they became their fluffy, ambitious, energetic, and precocious selves. Born to the water, they were quick to take to their element, and within an hour of their hatching were launched on their own. From the moment of their first dip, the young goslings were expert swimmers, and from now on, the water would be both home and protection. As the days passed, the boy was often at his observation post, never disturbing his friends, never interfering with their daily routine, yet developing a very possessive feeling about this particular family. These were his geese, and he would see that no harm came to them. And so time went by, the youngsters feeding and growing, the parent birds keeping watch over them. In fact, the goose made it a point, even when taking a nap, to always sleep with one eye open. For all the family protection, there always seemed to be one tag-along in every brood with an instinct for getting separated from the others. And when this happened in the tall marsh grass, he might just as well be wandering alone in the woods. Now he was easy prey for whatever predator might happen along. It was Dan who found him wandering far afield. And this time, Dan made an exception to his rule. For once, he would interfere. Better the boy finding him than some fox or coyote, or some bloodthirsty mink. It was Dan who located the family the youngster might never have found in his panic and confusion. And it was Dan who put things in order again. One small, lost gosling, one frantic, distraught family, one happy reunion. A rewarding moment, Dan felt. Later that summer, there came upon the geese the curious condition known as the molting time. As a result of it, they lost the power of flight. Try as they might, they just couldn't get off the ground. On the water, it was the same. Though they flapped their wings frantically, the vital flight feathers were gone. They flew after a fashion. They went through the motions, but even their most strenuous efforts took them only a short distance, and they were never airborne for long. For birds so given to the air, this seemed a strange handicap for nature to inflict on them. Yet this was her way of overhauling her marvelous flying machines. This was her maintenance period. During the next couple of months, the geese would grow an entire new set of flight feathers and would in time be as good as new, refurbished and re-outfitted for the long journey south in the fall. The perils of the geese tended to multiply as the summer progressed, particularly when the marsh grass became tinder dry and the lightning storms began to flicker on the horizon. It took only a single bolt of lightning to turn the marsh into an inferno. And now, when the geese needed most of all to fly, they were as helpless as the rest. Where the geese had entered the water willingly, there were others who took to it as a reluctant last resort. Yet, they too seemed to understand that a water barrier was the only thing to stop the advancing flames. One morning, as summer turned to fall, Dan heard something in the distance that disturbed him. It was not the calling of the geese, for that was a sound he'd heard all season long, and he was quite accustomed to it. It was the sound of guns booming, an ominous barrage that he knew could only mean trouble for his friends. For this, he remembered, was the season of the hunter. It bothered Dan that his geese should be in danger. And without quite knowing what he would do about it, or could do about it, he decided he must go to where they were and try to warn them. Meanwhile, his favorite pair had heard the shooting too. Instinctively, they made it a point to fly low, always keeping below treetop level and following secret channels and back byways. The shooting seemed louder now. The boy knew the hunters were near. Indeed, they seemed everywhere. Suddenly, they were right in his pocket. His gander. Dan knew it was his gander. His only thought now was to find the bird before the hunter's dog could get to it. The gander had been winged, but not mortally hurt. The boy's heart went out to him. He knew he must get the bird away from these guns.
I've got it. That's all we can do now. The rest is up to him.
Mom, when he gets well, me and me I keep him for a pet.
Maybe, if he doesn't mind being kept.
Fortunately, the gun blast had been off the mark. Only a few pellets had struck the gander, but one of those had nicked a wing muscle, and now it was apparent the bird was in for a long convalescence.
Let's give him a chance to get acquainted with his new surroundings.
By late October, Dan's mother decided that the wing was strong enough, that the bothersome splint could be removed. This was a great day for the patient, and young Dan, too. The wild creature he'd come to consider his own was at last well and whole again. With patient, expert fingers, Dan's mother worked carefully as any surgeon.
He looks well enough to fly. I think you should turn him loose.
But I want to keep him for a pet.
He'll never be a pet, just a prisoner.
Only if I had a little bit more time with him. He'll be real tame.
Very little time left. He should be gone before the winter sets in. You think about it, Dan.
Meanwhile, the gander's mate continued to haunt the waterways, calling forlornly, searching the farthest reaches of the sanctuary in the hope of finding him. She couldn't understand what had happened to him. She only knew dimly that she wanted him and needed him. But time, it seemed, was running out. Now the nearby peaks were burdened with snow. Now a frosty chill lay on the air. And now the ancient signal was coming through again. And the wild geese knew without question that it was time to turn south. Obeying the flock instinct with the others, The goose began the return journey too. Then suddenly she felt compelled to drop out of the formation and turn back. Back for one last look. Who is to know and who's to say what led her eventually to a certain lonely barnyard, except the bond of fidelity that guided her there. Together again at last, yet separated as much as ever. For the pen was so confining, the gander had no room for takeoff. The goose is a bird that cannot spring into the air as certain ducks can. It requires a long runway. And so until the gate were opened, the gander would remain a captive.
And keep your coat buttoned.
Hey, Mom, look!
That must be his mate.
Now came the test, the trial of conscience. Could the boy let his prisoner go?